Hello, my name is Farris Gray. I am the Sagamore of the Massachusetts tribe. For many of you that don't know who the Massachusetts were the indigenous people that inhabited the greater Boston area for thousands of years. And the Commonwealth took the name of the Massachusetts tribe and took it for themselves. So I'm here today to talk to you about Columbus and honoring him and what that means to the indigenous population here in Massachusetts. If you don't know already, Columbus was not a very nice person, even by European standards. He did a lot of bad things to the indigenous population in the Caribbean, and it's not unique to Columbus. It was part of the colonialism that spread across this whole, all of the Americas. Quite frankly, I can tell you the way that Columbus is viewed in the indigenous community. He is viewed as a terrorist. Quite frankly, he was a terrorist. He committed acts of terror on the people, and so that makes him a terrorist. He said terrible things, cutting off people's limbs, heads, boiling people, raping people, stealing from people, destroying whole communities. That's a terrible person. So it says a lot if people are going to honor a person like this, especially if they are made aware that this person did these terrible deeds. Indigenous people are human beings first. Before we are anything else, we are all human beings. For someone to celebrate, anyone to celebrate another human being who openly just murdered people and committed atrocities against people, it says a lot about a community and what they're capable of if they can honor such a person. In the past, maybe people weren't aware of who Columbus was and the deeds that Columbus did. Maybe they just learned that Columbus discovered America. Well, the indigenous population can't even understand why the United States, any of the states, would honor Columbus. He never stepped foot in North America. So he did not discover America. He might have discovered the Caribbean, but not North America. So why honor him at all? We believe it's part of a propaganda that wants to keep their people in line, or maybe miseducated, is better said, to who Columbus was. So it's been a long fight for indigenous people to get their ruling power to understand what it's like to be indigenous, or some of the challenges we face. One of the main challenges is colonialism. And so we would ask that communities, towns, and cities help get rid of colonialism. We've come to a time in our existence where it's no longer acceptable to treat people in this way. We are more aware of our fellow human beings and to the needs they have, basic needs. So there's really no excuse in this time and age for any community to honor someone who have done such terrible things. And plus, I mean, Columbus, it's just a negativity thing. He did so many negative things. Why honor him at all? It's time for us to shed this way of thinking and start to grow and ask all of our community, what is it that you need? What is it that we're doing that harms you? I can tell you from experience and from our oral tradition that this is something that's passed down through the generations. This colonialism, this assimilation, this not caring for the indigenous population. It's blatant and it's open, from the state seal to indigenous mascots to Columbus. I mean, it's all the same monster. We'd ask, the town of Wesley to seriously consider getting rid of Columbus Day and replacing it with the Indigenous Peoples Day to finally show some honor to the indigenous people of the Commonwealth. We have a long and awesome history, and it might not have gone so well for the indigenous people when the colonists got here. We don't hold that against people today. It's in the past, and we can't change the past. But what we can change is the future, and how we treat people. And shouldn't let misinformation exist in this day of information. Everyone can Google Columbus. Everyone can read what Columbus did. And if you're not appalled at what Columbus did, then perhaps you've lost your humanity. Children read about Columbus now, and not with the school teachers. They Google Columbus, and they see what he's done, so they ask why we honor him as well. So I think it's our duty as adults to fix the wrongs of the past if we can, and it's our duty as adults to correct misinformation with correct information. We owe that to our young, all of our young, no matter what your race is. We owe that to our young, to hand them off something that is better than we received. And so, in closing, I would just really like to ask the town of Wellesley to consider getting rid of Columbus Day, because it is harmful not just to Indigenous people, but to all people, and mostly it's harmful to our children. So I thank you for your time. Again, my name is Ferris Gray, and I am the Sagamore of the Massachusetts tribe. Thank you.
We, as prominent Wellesley High School graduates, believe that the town of Wellesley should celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day and cease to celebrate Columbus Day.
It is of the utmost importance that we as a community recognize that Indigenous people have been mistreated and oppressed since the inception of the United States of America.
Indigenous people were brutally murdered, raped, and abused at the hands of Christopher Columbus and those with him.
It is completely inappropriate for Wellesley to continue to celebrate a holiday that glorifies the massacre of Indigenous people.
As Black people that are connected to Wellesley, we cannot sit in silence against this injustice.
We feel it necessary to communicate with all of you the importance of having Indigenous People Day and to cease the celebration of Columbus.
We live on land that was stolen from the people of the Massachusetts tribe and was built by people who were abducted from their own land.
The white supremacy and racism that is still rampant to this day in America started with the genocide of Indigenous people, and we can no longer condone these behaviors through the celebration of Columbus.
So, please vote yes on Article number 42 and offer your support of Indigenous Peoples Day.
Hi, my name is Harriet Warshaw, and this evening I'd like to encourage all of us to think about Article 42. From my 10 years of experience on the Board of Selectmen and working with the World of Wellesley, we've worked hard to raise awareness about diversity and inclusion. But now, in this world that we live in, it is time for action. We need to show to all of our residents and to our young people how important diversity and inclusion are in our community. It is time for us to think about our history and make this authentic for Wellesley. It's a time for us to acknowledge the important role that Indigenous people have played in the formation of the town of Wellesley. I urge you to vote for Article 42 to make this a reality and a welcoming community for all of Wellesley.
Buju Anin, Joan Andeg, Indigenous Cause, Migize du Dame Ninda Au, Odawa Zaga Iganing Dunjaba. Last year, on the second Monday of October, Wellesley celebrated our very first Indigenous Peoples Day. We had Indigenous presence on the land. It was a homecoming, a coming full circle, reuniting our hearts and our feet with this land that is loved and known and appreciated. Despite 400 years of settler disregard, 400 years of being claimed, manipulated, and extracted, the land remembered. The colonizer came here not remembering what it is to be connected to each other and life. They did not remember that this earth is alive and she is our mother. They claimed, stole, and abused the land as an object, as property. but the land never forgot. When Claudia Foxtree played her drum and her daughter danced, the land remembered. Indigenous Peoples Day isn't about inclusion. We have been forcibly included in the settler system since the Pilgrims showed up and robbed our children's graves and emptied our winter caches. We are generous people. We would have shared, and we have shared all along. But the settlers did not come respectfully and humbly as relations. They violently forced our families from these lands. They attempted to abort and annihilate us from existence. But we are still here. The indigenous people of this world, we have a different way of being in relation with Aki, with the land, and all life. We do not dominate, claim, tear up, pollute, and destroy the land, air, water in order to extract riches for personal gain. The settler system glorifies itself as the hero who discovered and conquered this new world, opening the land for tyrannized people to find liberty and self-rule. They teach our children about these early freedom fighters and the great democracy they built. But they do not consider the people whose lives they destroyed and are continuing to oppress in order to advance the aims of their state. Think for a minute about what it means that this Turtle Island continent and all indigenous and discovered lands, colonized lands around the world, were the homes of hundreds of millions of human beings who had been living sustainably on their homelands since time immemorial. And the hubris of a few European men, monarchs, popes, and mercenaries, who decided to claim and plunder entire continents. This is what they call the doctrine of discovery. A few men in power set loose a virulent plague that has infected and decimated most of the biodiversity of the planet. It is a plague of greed, brutal domination, claiming life and lives as property, buying and selling for personal gain, selfishness, isolation, separation from family and community, self-interest, disregard for the suffering of others. This is a disease that came with Columbus. He was an extremely virulent vector. In his first 5 years occupying the lands of the Taino and Arawak people, the population dropped by something like 98-99%. People killed brutally and enslaved. In America, it was John Cabot and his sons who discovered and claimed this continent, the Northeast, for the King of England. In our time scale, the time scale of the indigenous people, we have been here on this land since time immemorial. European imperialism is this little piece of recent time, and the time since then, US imperialism is even tinier piece of that. And all this is ignored and erased. When Columbus landed, he planted the royal standard, a sword with a cross for a handle. By that ceremony, he initiated the claiming and the enslavement of the land and the people. He implanted the royal standard of thought of rules of law, of authoritarianism, and punishment of dissenters. The state standards of education that are taught to our children perpetuate this claim of domination. In 3rd grade in Wellesley, children are taught that history begins in 1620, when the Pilgrims left Europe and arrived on these shores. They give a nod to Indigenous presence by saying that the Wampanoag people were already here, living, this is a quote from the state standards, living in organized communities and surviving on natural resources. For me, this language evokes imagery of primitivism. Everything in the history and social science and entire curriculum is told from a Euro-settler perspective. This past school year, it was not safe for my child to be in the classroom when these violent and dehumanizing myths were being taught as history. She became ill during the first lesson on the Wampanoag people. And I pulled her from the classroom for as much of that as I possibly could. In the settler colonial system, employees of the state are required to do what the state directs them to do. They're bound by the rules and limitations of the system. Everyone I spoke to about this racism in the curriculum, everyone from teachers to principals to curriculum developers at the local and state levels, wanted to help. Everybody saw it, everybody understood, everybody wanted to help, and they all said their hands were tied. What does it tell you when the people that we trust to educate and nurture our children tell you, in response to a plea to please stop teaching hurtful racism, that they cannot stop? The people I spoke with in our local education system are good-hearted people. They all felt mired in the bureaucracy of the state and unable to make changes. What this tells me is that they are prisoners too, forced to do the work of the state whether they agree with it or not, or risk losing their jobs, their health care, the safety and security of their families. We need to stand together and choose truth, integrity, and courage. If you haven't already, I urge you all to view the Wake Up Wellesley video of the discussion by the young ethnic scholars of the Wellesley school system. It's on their YouTube channel. Our children are crying and telling us that this racist system of education is damaging them. We need to stop and listen. We need to stand up and protect our children, all of our children. We need to stop teaching stories that harm, stories that glorify conquest and brutality. We need to choose to honor life, diversity, richness, and complexity, and the humanity of all people. We need to stand together to correct this horrendous lie that we were all taught and that we believed in. We need to face the truth. It is time for us to acknowledge that we live under an authoritarian state, dressed up as freedom and democracy. The mercenaries are still capturing and enslaving Black people, though now we call it poverty, policing, and mass incarceration. So we need to question why Indigenous and Black people have been oppressed for so long? What power do we carry that the state so fears that it has kept our peoples oppressed and excluded and erased? We carry the power to bring this system down. We remember life and the original instructions. We know to the depths of our being, beyond our brutalized bodies and cultures, that what they are doing is wrong. It is wrong to celebrate a man who represents selfishness, disregard, greed, brutality, violence, pillaging, oppression. It is wrong to continue to teach these standards in our schools. It's wrong to continue to participate in a system that is still claiming and raping and pillaging the land. Only now we call it eminent domain, extraction, and quarterly profits.
We need to understand that we will not solve our problems with the environment and our annihilation off the planet. Mother Earth does not need us. We have to understand that these are big problems. And World of Wellesley is engaged in a citizens petition. You will see on your tables that we want our community to live in the truth. It starts with this symbolic gesture. It's symbolic. Indigenous people have been asking since the 70s to no longer recognize Columbus as a holiday, as a person, as a man, when we know the truth, that this man brought genocide and slavery to this land, to these grounds. Anawan speaks of his people and speaks of lack of representation. There's 50,000 Native Americans who live in Massachusetts. And I hear this when I talk about honoring Indigenous people and no longer honoring Columbus. Well, they're not here. They don't live in Wellesley. Think about that. Now first, they do live in Wellesley. And then also, if they don't, why is that? And so I am calling really to think about what this means to our collective force in all of the problems that we are faced with. We cannot be a welcoming community if we do not honor the First Nations peoples whose land we are on. We just can't. And if we can't live in that truth, then let's stop saying it. Okay? We are striving to be a welcoming community, but honoring Indigenous people, the First Nations people, the people who are protecting these lands as we speak, who are protecting the biodiversity. 80% of the biodiversity of this planet are being protected by 5% of the Indigenous people. This is something that I would say is truly small. I know as an Italian American that this holds something else, but I think we need to be ready to push that aside and have other leaders, other people that we can really truly love and honor in the truth. We need to push forward through this. I know this is tough, I know this is uncomfortable, but I would have to ask, truly, do you honestly think that we are going to be able to solve problems around the environment, around housing, around our students walking out of our high school? People saying they're not welcome in this community. If we can't honor the truth and honor Indigenous people on the second Monday of October, and understand our Italian heritage and our Italian community and our brothers and sisters here, including myself, that we know we came to this land and stepped over Black and brown people. We stepped over Indigenous people and Black people. I know my family did. They didn't look back, they stepped over them and they got in the white line. Okay? I honestly need you to think about this and really to Tina's point, what are we giving up? Yes. Okay, what are we giving up? What are we gaining? What are we telling our children to live in the truth? Indigenous people are here. They were here. They are here. They know how to steward this land. We need to listen to our black and brown brothers and sisters. We need to start that now with this symbolic gesture for this town. This is something simple that we can do, and if we can't, we need to have an honest conversation about why we can't. And then what are we going to do? How do we move forward collectively when we really are not ready to live in the truth? I am ready to live in the truth, and I hope you're ready to live there with me.
Town meeting, please vote yes on Indigenous Peoples Day.